Okay, so let's fire up Godot and create a new project. Let's call this Copy Arrays and Dictionaries tutorial. And let's create a folder. Now it's all clear, so create and edit. I'm using /, but you can use whichever renderer works for your machine. And I don't use Git. So instead of using the usual print statements that appear in the output down here, I don't know why it's doing all that, but never mind. What we're going to do is create a little user interface. So let's save that. Before we do anything else, we'll call it main, and we'll create a directory for UI streams and save it in there. Before we go any further, let's change some project settings. In the window, I'm going to put it to 1920 by 1080, which is full HD. I'm also going to change this stretch mode to viewport, so this viewport will simply scale up if we make it bigger or smaller, scale up or down, without moving any of the elements on the screen. So we've called our scene main, so let's rename the top level node to match, and let's add some UI elements. The first thing I want to do is give it a nice background color, so let's put in color rect, and we'll expand that to fill the whole screen. There you go. Just make sure this is filling the screen as well. There we go. Let's give our color rect a nice dark blue color. Something like that's good. What we're going to do is divide up the UI into a little list area for buttons and a place to display text over here. So how we do that is, what we're going to start off with is a margin container. Make that fill the screen. And within the margin container, we're going to have an HBox container, and this will let us split up the screen horizontally. Notice, however, when I click on the margin container and the HBox container, that at the moment they're the same size. That's because the default margin container doesn't have any margins. So let's go to theme overrides, constants, and put a margin of 20 into everything. Now if we click the HBox container now, you see it's indented from the edge of the screen, and then things won't be bumping into the edge of the screen and looking a bit ugly. So within the HBox container, I want a VBox container to hold my buttons. So let's add that. And for the rest of it, we're going to use a scroll container to contain our text area. Scroll. This is the one we want here. You'll notice there's a little warning on here because a scroll container has to contain something. At the moment it doesn't contain anything, so for our text we're going to use a label for our text display. So let's add that in. And then in our button area we're going to have two buttons. Let's find a button. Duplicate that, Control D, and we'll put some text on them. So the first one is going to be called a next button. The second one is a quick button to close the program. Our scroll container needs to fill up what's left of the screen, So let's expand it. It fills it up, and then we want our label to fill the scroll container within that. So let's do that. Okay. And before we go any further, let's rename some things so that we can refer to them more sensibly in our script when we get to do that. So let's call this a next button. And this one is our quit button. We need to refer to the scroll container because we're going to want to reset it to the top of the screen when we display some new content. So I'll just call that text scroller. And our label we're going to call text output because that's what we're using it for. Okay, so before we go any further, let's make the UI a little bit different to the default. So the first thing I want to do is to create a theme. So let's create a folder to hold themes, and within that we'll create a new resource. We search for theme. There we go. Let's create that. Now we have to give it a new name, so let's just call it default. You notice we've got the theme editing options down the bottom here. If I expand that. And the thing that I'm most interested in is changing the default font. So what I'm going to use for this is a fixed width font. So let's create a folder to hold fonts under the themes area. Now I'm running Godot on Windows, so I can select a font from the Windows fonts directory. Let's go there, and I've already decided that I want to use Consoleless for this project. So I'm just going to drag and drop Consoleless regular into fonts. Oh, didn't go in the right place. Let's move it. So let's load that into as the default font here. So we can just do quick load. There's only one font, so we just go open. And you'll notice that nothing's changed up here, even though it's changed down here. That's because we haven't actually used this theme for this screen yet. So let's go up to our main, click theme in the inspector, quick load. There's only one to select, so open that, and you can see that the buttons have now changed. And if we put some text in our label, you can see it's also using the Consoleless font. However, it's a bit small, so let's go back to our theme. We're just going to do a quick and dirty change here by just changing the default font size here rather than on individual elements. Just put that up to 24, and that's a much nicer size. So if I run the project now, first of all, of course, I have to select what is the root or main scene. So I can select current because it's going to be the only one. And there we go. Something to notice is that everything's kind of cramped up together. So let's fix that first. We can separate the scroll container and the VBox container by adjusting the separation in the HBox container. So if we go to theme overrides, constants, separation, if we put a value of say 140 in there, you'll see immediately the text has moved over here because this gap here is now 140 pixels wide. And we can do the same for the buttons. We can space them out vertically in the VBox container. So for this we'll use value 20, and that spaces the buttons out nicely. Oh, I just noticed there's a spelling mistake on the next button, so let's correct that. And the other thing we want to do is make the buttons a bit less small. So select one, shift click to select the other. We go to layout in the inspector. I'll expand this a little bit so you can see what it says. Custom minimum size, and I'll go with a value of 100. Notice that when this expands, when these buttons expand, they expand the VBox container that contains them as well, and this also pushes over the text a little bit. because this gap between these two elements is still 140 pixels. So that doesn't look too bad. Let's have a look at it. Quick look. Yeah, that's fine. Now these buttons don't do anything yet because we haven't hooked them up, and the text will remain unchanged until we actually tell it to do something. So this may seem like a lot of work to display text instead of just showing it in the output area. I thought it'd be nice to show a bit of UI work in addition to the main topic of this tutorial, which is copying arrays and dictionaries. To add some functionality to everything, we now need a script. We're just going to have one script on our main function here. Let's add a script. Gives it the same name. We'll keep the default template. In this script, we're never going to need the process function, so we can remove that. You'll notice in this tutorial that I use the terms function and method to refer to functions. The technically correct term in Godot is methods, but I prefer to just say function because, well, they're defined as funcs. Anyway, moving on. Let's delete this comment here, we don't need it. The first thing we can do is add references to what we want to work with over here to our script. So the two things we've got here at the minute is the text scroller and the text output that we need to access. So let's click on the text scroller and drag it across here, and then hold down the control key while we release the mouse button. It will automatically create a variable which refers to that node path. We can make this more concise if I undo that and then right click the text scroller and do access as unique name, and then do the same thing again. Drag it across, hold down control, release the mouse button. You see it just has %text scroller instead of the full node path. Now the advantage of using this method is that if the structure of the nodes here changes, then that reference to text scroller will remain valid. We'll do the same thing with text output, make it unique, and drag it onto there. So the next thing we want to do is set up our button. So if we click the next button, and go to the node tab over here, what we have is signals and groups in here. We're interested in the pressed signal. As you can see, the pop-up tells you a little bit about what happens there. So if we double click it to connect this signal to our main script, and it adds a function here that will run when you click the next button. We'll do the same for quit. Connect it. So if we run our program and we click those buttons, they just don't do anything at the minute. That's because there isn't any code inside the functions yet. So the first thing it would be nice to do would make a click sound when you click the buttons. What we're going to do is go back to main here. We're going to add an AudioStreamPlayer. There's different types of AudioStreamPlayer. This one is just the most basic one, which is not positional. The other ones for 2D and 3D depend on your position in 2D or 3D space, which is effectively how far away the camera is from that audio source as to whether or not you'll be able to hear it. So let's create that, and we'll call that click button. So we go to the inspector for that. Notice over here we have a stream and it's empty. That's because it doesn't have any audio in there yet. So what I'm going to do is cheat. I'm going to use the AssetLib to grab some UI interface sounds. So let's search for audio. Oops, helps you spell it correctly. We're going to get this Kenny UI audio, the famous Kenny. And you'll notice that in this description that the original Og Vorbis sounds have been converted to WAV for use in Godot. So let's download that. When it's finished downloading, you'll notice it's automatically creating an add-ons directory and putting the UI audio in there. If there's any sounds in here that you don't want, what we have to do is uncheck them. Let's do that for a couple of these down here, and then click install. That's it. So to add some audio to our click button audio player, let's just go to add-ons and the directory containing all that. Let's try one. So we dump it in there and then click playing. It'll play the sound. So let's try another one. See if we like that. So I've already played around with this, and the one that I ended up liking is this switch one sound here. Okay, so let's collapse that. So that's our audio there. So what we need to do now is go back to our script, and when we press a button we need to play the click button sound. So we need a reference to it up here. So again, let's make it unique in case we decide to move it somewhere later. Control, drag, drop it there. We've got click button. It's just as simple as going click button dot play. So we also want that in our quit function. Position the mouse cursor anywhere on that line and press Ctrl C or Command C on Mac, and then Ctrl V to paste it here. And we can use Ctrl X to get rid of this pass statement. We don't need that. Now if we run our little program, we now get the click sound when we click it. But the buttons still don't do anything else. That's a good start. First thing we want to do is add the quit functionality. So let's go get tree .quit. Okay, so let's see what happens when we use it now. So we click the quit button. You'll notice that the program closes so fast we don't get to hear the click sound. So let's put in a small delay so that the click sound has time to play before the program closes. So what we're going to do is create a timer, give it a time of 0.2 seconds, and then we're interested in the timeout signal. So let's try that again. And this time we get the click and then the program closes. Now the delay we've introduced there, which is 1/5 of a second, is noticeable when we're closing the program, but it does feel better at the same time because we're getting the click sound. Okay, let's set up some variables here that we want to work with. So this tutorial is about arrays and dictionaries and copying them, so let's set up some array and dictionary variables we can work with. Nothing complicated, so from and you'll notice that I'm using the colon equals convention. And what that does is it forces the variable to be an array, so you can't assign a string or something like that to it. Let's have a couple of dictionaries. I'm also going to add in another variable called demo counter. Now to start with, this is not going to be obvious what it's for, but hopefully it should become clear. Oh, perhaps if you put var in it. So in our ready function we're going to do some initialization. So the first thing we want to do is clear the text that's shown in the label. So that's the text output reference here, and in a label the text itself is held in the text property, so let's just set that to an empty string. So I want to initialize array 1 to a set of values. Now we could have done this in the variable declaration up here, but I've done it this way just so it's a bit clearer what's going on where. And we're also going to add a couple of key value pairs to dictionary 1. So the key in this case is called name, and the value is Symbalis, which of course is the name of this channel. And we'll do the other item, the other key. Misspelled that one. There we go. and I'll just call this one value. Even though it's a key, you can call it anything you like, so hopefully that's not too confusing that I've called the key value and the value is 100. We can get rid of this pass statement here. Okay, so if we run our little program now, you see the text box is now blank because we've cleared it instead of showing the sample text, and we can quit. Right, so let's add a function that will add some text to the text box, and this is going to be our introductory topic. So I'm just copy and paste this from when I did earlier. The function is called demo_0, and all it does is add a bunch of text to our label. Now, how are we going to access this function? Okay, so what I'm going to do is have a series of functions that are called demo_1 that are just numbered sequentially like this. In there for the moment, and what we're going to do is display this initially, and then when you click the next button it will jump to the next function. So what we need to be able to do that is some helper functions. So let's add our first helper function, which is the function to call the function that we want, and we're going to do this procedurally instead of calling explicit function names. So how do we do that? So I'm just going to copy paste this in from another source. And our function is called showNextTopic. Now what it does is it declares a variable called funcName, as in function name. The first part of the variable value is the string, so it's a string, is demo_, and then it's converting the demo counter value from a variable to a string and concatenating that onto the end of demo. So if we go back to our variable declarations, demo counter starts out at 0, so the first time that we do this, the name stored in funcName will be demo_0. Then what we're doing is self refers to the current scene and the current script. What we're doing is we're checking to see if we have a method called funcName. So in this case it'd be demo0. Do we have that function name? Yes, we do, so we'll run these statements here. So the first thing to do is to reset the text scroller, which is our scroll container here, back to the top by setting its scroll vertical property to 0. We're also going to set the text output.text to the demo counter value plus a colon and a space. And what that will do is it will just put a number in front of whatever text we add to the text label. And then what we're going to do is call funcName. So in this case, we're calling demo0 to start with. If there is no such function, so let's say we step through to demo3 and it doesn't exist, instead we'll just change the label text to this, click quit to exit. After we've done any of this, we can increment the demo counter. And what that means is every time we go through this function, it will attempt to run the next numbered function, demo_ whatever the number is. So simple thing to do here is on next button pressed, we want to show the next topic. So show next topic. So when we enter the program for the first time, we want some text to be shown in our text box. The easy way to do that is just to add the showNextTopic function to the ready function, and that will call this with demo counter set to 0, and therefore it will run this function here, demo0. Let's put something in this demo1. So let's say, copy that. And we'll just put next topic in there for the moment. Let's see what happens when we run this. So we've displayed our 0th topic information. And you'll notice I've got a horizontal scroll bar at the bottom here. This is spot the deliberate mistake time. And what's happening is that this line here is too long to fit within the label, so it's overrunning the label and expanding the label horizontally. And because we've got it inside a scroll container, it gives us a horizontal scroll bar. Now we don't really want that to happen, so we'll fix that in a moment. So if I click next, we see next topic. If I click next again, it says click quit to exit, and I can click next as many times as I want and it will just tell us the same thing. So let's quit. Okay, so let's fix our label overrunning horizontally. Let's go back to 2D view, click here to select the label. We could just have easily selected it from there. What we want to do is go over to auto wrap mode and change that to word. And what that means is it'll automatically wrap the text as soon as a word will not fit on a given line. So let's run, just to show that that works, let's just run it again very quickly, and you can see now the word method has wrapped onto the second line. And we haven't got our horizontal scroll bar anymore. Let's quit. Right, we just need to go back to our script now for the rest of what we're doing. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is add some information to our demo1 function, which is our first topic. And the first topic we're going to cover is simply copying an array with the equals operator, as we've noted up here. I'm going to copy paste in some code and replace this. Okay, now it's going to give us some errors because I've copied in a reference to a function that I'm going to use to output the array. But let's quickly just go through this first, and then we'll add the output array online function. We're introducing the topic here, and what we're going to say is what array 1 contains, and we use our function here to display array 1, because remember we're not using print down here, we're actually outputting things into the label. Then we're going to copy array 1 to array 2 with this statement here, and have a look, see what array 2 contains. Then we're going to change a value in array 1, which is this statement here, and we'll see how that affects array 1 and array 2. So before we go any further, let's add our output array function. And as the saying goes, here's one I made earlier. So we've got rid of our errors, shrink down this output area because we don't need that to be so large now. So what this does is it takes an array. Godot will throw an error if you try and pass it something that's not an array. It first checks to see if the array's got anything in it. If it hasn't, in other words the array size is 0, then we'll just say empty array and go back. If the array contains something, then we'll iterate through the array and add each value on the same line of the text label. And then finally we'll add a new line to finish off the line of values. Let's see how this looks now. Let's run the project. And incidentally, running the project also saves everything that's in the project, saves any changes. So there's our intro. If we click next, so we're doing a simple copy of an array. Array 1 contains what we initialized it with in the ready function. When we copy array 1 to array 2 with the equals operator, array 2 now contains the same information. We change a value in array 1 as we showed in the code to 555. Notice that it also changes the same value in array 2. So of course the next question is, why does this happen? And the answer is that the array variable does not actually contain the data. The array variable is a pointer to an area in memory that contains this data. So when we copy array 1 to array 2 here, what we're actually copying is the pointer value in array 1 to be stored also in array 2. So they are two different pointers, but they're pointing to the same chunk of data in memory, which is this array of values here. So if you change a value in one of them, it will apparently change it in the other. There isn't actually another array, it's actually the same array, the same set of array data. So what I'm going to do now is add another function. So this is going to be demo_2. So with our function that we did earlier down here, show next topic, it'll almost automatically go on to this next topic when we click the next button in, and we're showing this. So what we're going to do here is try clearing an array. We're not actually changing anything in either array 1 or array 2 here. And then we're going to clear array 2 with this command here, statement if you prefer. And then after we've done that, we'll see what each array contains. So let's give that a go. So that's our first thing. And again, this is demo2 function is outputting this information. So as before, array 1 and array 2 still contain the same data with that changed 555 number here. If we clear array 2, this also affects array 1 because they are still pointing at the same section of memory. It's worth being aware of things like this because there may be cases where you have multiple references to the same set of array data and you want to avoid accidentally messing up your array in one place without realizing that it also affects something somewhere else. However, why is it good that we're just copying the pointer? Well, when you return an array from a function, what you're actually returning is the pointer value. So let's say you assign variable z to an array from function blah. Instead of copying the whole array generated in function blah when you assign z equals blah, then what happens is z simply gets assigned the pointer value, and this is very, very fast. It's roughly equivalent to copying an integer value. Another scenario where this is useful, let's say you've got an array that you want to refer to in one of your objects in your node tree, and the path to that array is a bit long and tortuous. What you can do is copy that array to a temporary variable to use as a reference to that array, and that can make the code that follows easier to follow and a bit clearer. Okay, on to the next demo function. So in this function we're going to use duplicate to copy the array. We're going to reset array 1 back to the original set of values. You're going to see what that looks like. Then we'll run this statement here where we're using the duplicate method on array 1 to copy array 1 to array 2. Then we'll see what array 2 contains. What we'll do is we'll clear array 2 and see how that affects array 1 and array 2. So let's run our program. Next, next, next. So we reset array 1 so it contains the original set of values. Then we're duplicating it with the duplicate method here. So array 2 contains the same thing, or seems to. Now let's clear array 2. Array 1 still contains the original data, but array 2 is now an empty array because we've cleared it. What's happened here is when you use the duplicate method when you're assigning an array to another array, is that the whole array is copied instead of just copying the pointer value. So this set of data here is actually held in a different area of memory to this set of data here. So when we clear it here, it clears that area of memory and not this one because they are separate. So if you want to work on a copy of an array instead of the original array, this is the way to do it. And this is okay for what I would call a flat array, where the array does not contain any other data structures, it just contains simple values such as integers, strings, and so on. So this is demo 4. Now, we've got an error here because I'm using two new helper functions here, which is one is to make an array of dictionaries and the other one is to output an array of dictionaries. So let's deal with that first. So let's add our make array of dictionaries function first. What we're doing here is defining the function name, and this bit here means that this function will return an array of dictionaries. So we're declaring an empty array that is an array of dictionaries, and then we're iterating through this section of code 3 times, and each time we're declaring a new dictionary called dict as an empty dictionary. The first key value pair is ID and whatever the value of x is, and then we're adding another key value pair based on x. Key value pair is name and whatever value we give to it here. I don't know if you've used the match statement yet, but what this does is it takes a variable and matches whatever value that variable has to a series of values here. In other programming languages, this is also known as a switch statement, and it's equivalent to doing a long series of if then, if then, if then, if x equals this, x equals that, or whatever, and then at the end we have the underline value which matches to any value that has not already been matched. And so what happens is initially x is 0, so we end up with the ID 0 and the name 0. Then it goes to x equals 1, which is ID of 1, and the name of 1 in text, and then whatever else it throws at it, it just uses the ID is whatever the value of X is, and it puts no ID as the name. So that'll be for 2. Now this for loop here, this can be a little bit confusing in Godot because it iterates starting from 0, but it goes around the loop that many times. If it starts at 0, that means it goes 0, 1, 2. That's 3 iterations around the loop. X will never actually reach the value 3. That just tells it how many times to go around the loop. At the end of each iteration of the loop, we're appending the dictionary to the array R, and then we're returning the array. And as noted before, what we're actually returning here is a pointer value that points to the array that we've assembled in this function. And then up here, it assigns that pointer value to array 1, because notice we've got a simple copy here with the equal sign. We could, in theory, go .duplicate here, but we don't need to, because as soon as this function goes out of scope, any references to that array that are held in this function will be removed. So the other thing we need to do is output an array of dictionaries. So let's go down here to where we've got our helper functions and make some space. This actually requires 2 separate functions. And here are those functions. So let's look at the second one first, just to be contrary. This is output dictionary online. So what that's going to do is add a line of text to our label that contains the dictionary contents. If the dictionary is empty, we just say empty dictionary and go back again. What this statement here is doing is it's grabbing an array of the key names that are in the dictionary. Now the reason for doing that is because, as you can see here, we can now iterate through the array of key names. Before that, we're throwing out a new line, so the dictionary is on its own separate line. And what we're doing here is we're printing out the key value, and what we're doing is checking to see if the key value is a string or not. If so, we just add it to the label text. If not, then we convert it to a string and then add it. That's what this var string does here. We add an equals, so that we're saying this key equals whatever this value is, and we're going to do the same thing with the value. Check if it's a string, and if it's not, convert it to a string. You notice that what I'm using here is this square brackets convention to extract the key value based on the key name. This is an alternative to the dot notation, but when the key name is stored in a variable, you have to use the square brackets convention. Otherwise, it will take it as a literal key name and will give you an error because it won't find it in that dictionary. Okay, so that's outputting a dictionary on one line. So let's go back to our output array of dictionaries function. So this accepts an array and nothing else. If the array size is 0, it will ping out empty array, and then just iterates through the array to call output dictionary online for each member of the array. We could add extra validation to this function to make sure that this array here is actually an array of dictionaries, but for the purposes of this demo, we're not going to do that. The best way of doing that is actually to do this. Because we're using array 1 or array 2 as the value to pass to this, and they are just sort of generic arrays rather than an array of dictionary, we don't want to do that in this case. If we wanted to make that check in here, then the best place to do it would be each time we check X to see if it's a dictionary or not, and if it is, pass it on to the output function, and if it's not, just print another line that says something like, this is not a dictionary. So that's got rid of our errors in demo4 function. So what's happening in this function? We're making an array of dictionaries and assigning that to array 1. Then we're displaying that in our text label. Then we're saying we're going to copy array 1 to array 2 with a simple equals operator. Then we're going to see what array 2 contains. Then we're going to change a value in one of the dictionaries in array 1. Because we're referring to an array here, we have to use the square brackets convention, and we're referring to element 2, which is actually the third element in the array because the array element numbering starts at 0. And we're just changing the ID value to 555 again. And then we're going to see how that affects array 1 and array 2. So let's run that. Skip through to example 4. Array1 contains the set of dictionaries that we assigned to it from that function. Copy Array1 to Array2, and of course now they're the same. We change the dictionary value in Array1. This is the 555 change here. And of course it's reflected in Array2 because Array1 and Array2 are pointing at the same sets of data again. So let's move on to our next demo. So we're going to leave arrays for a moment and have a look at dictionaries. So we're going to do the same thing as we did earlier with an array. We're going to do a simple copy of a dictionary. We're going to use our output dictionary online function to display the contents of dictionary 1. Copy it to dictionary 2, see what dictionary 2 contains. Change a value in dictionary 1. I'm going to change one of the names to bananas. I'm going to change, the name to bananas, and then see how that affects dictionary 1 and dictionary 2. I think you should be able to predict what's happening here. So if we skip through to topic 5, simple copy. So our dictionary 1 first to start with contains Symbalis and 100, just as we set up in the ready function. When we copy that, we end up with the same thing. And then if we change the name in dictionary 1 to bananas, you notice it also affects dictionary 2. That's because dictionaries and arrays share a lot of similarities in the way that they're handled, and dictionary 1 and dictionary 2, those variables are of course pointers to data blocks where this data is held. And when we do a simple copy like this, all we're doing is ending up pointing to the same data block. And of course that has the same advantages and disadvantages as for working with arrays. So let's move on to another demo. So here's the next demo, which is duplicating a dictionary. So again, we're going to look at what's in dictionary 1, which hasn't changed since we looked at it before. This time we're going to duplicate it, use the duplicate method, which is exactly the same as using duplicate with an array, and have a look at what dictionary 2 contains. Then we're changing a value in dictionary 2. In this case, we're changing the name to Eric the Viking, and we'll have a look at how that affects dictionary 1 and dictionary 2. So let's run that. Jump through to number 6. Here we go. So we've still got bananas in dictionary 1 because we haven't done anything. We're duplicating dictionary 1 to dictionary 2, and of course they're both the same at the minute. But if we change the name in dictionary 2 to Eric the Viking, this is now not affecting dictionary 1 because the duplicate method again copies the whole set of data that's in the dictionary instead of just copying the pointer values. So these are actually two separate sets of data at this point. In fact, from this point onwards. So let's have a look at another example. So this is demo 7. So what's going on here then? What we're going to do this time is duplicate an array of dictionaries. And this is part 1 of showing how this works. We're going to use our make array of dictionaries function again to reset array 1. Going to see what it looks like. Going to use array2 equals array1.duplicate, and here's the actual command here. Then we're going to see what array2 contains. Then what we're going to do is add an extra dictionary entry to array1, and that's what these commands here are doing, these statements. What we're doing is declaring an empty dictionary, giving it an ID key with value 99, a name key with value blah, and then appending that into array1. Then we're going to have a look at how that affects array1 and array2. And lastly, what we're going to do is change a value in one of the original dictionaries from array1. We're going to change it to this 555 number again and change the ID and see how that affects array1 and array2. Okay, but just a note here about this sequence of commands here. This could actually be collapsed onto one line by putting a dictionary definition in here instead of doing this long way here, but I thought I'd do it this way because it's a bit clearer. Okay, let's run that and see what happens. So go to number 7. There we go. We've reset array 1, so it's ID 1012, 01 no idea. We duplicate it, looks like the same set of data. We add a dictionary to array 1, Array 1 now contains that extra dictionary entry, but Array 2 doesn't. Now let's see what happens with the last bit, which is changing one of the original dictionary values in Array 1. And again we did the 555 value, but notice it's also changed it here. Why is this? Well, this is a little bit more complicated. What's happening here is we're duplicating the arrays, but we're not duplicating the dictionary data that is pointed to by each array value. Array 1 consists of a series of pointers that point to these 3 dictionaries. When we duplicate that, we're duplicating the pointers into Array 2. So we've now got a new array of pointers pointing to these 3 blocks of data. But this pointer here and this pointer here points to the exact same dictionary. Because Array 1 is its own set of pointers, when we add a new dictionary to Array 1, it doesn't affect Array 2 because they are 2 separate sets of pointers. However, down here, as we noted earlier, the pointers themselves are still pointing to the same dictionary data. So when we change it here, it also changes the dictionary here. This can be useful in certain circumstances if you want to have an array that's a subset of a different array or a superset of another array and so on. Okay, so let's add our last example. This is part 2 of duplicating an array of dictionaries. So again, we're resetting Array 1 with our make array of dictionaries function. And see what it looks like. Then what we're going to do is use this command here to copy Array 1 to Array 2. But notice in duplicate we've now got the value true as a parameter. The duplicate method defaults to false, so if we want this to be true we have to explicitly state it. You can also explicitly state false if you want to add that element of clarity to your code. So after duplicating it, we're going to see what Array 2 contains, which of course will look the same as Array 1 at the minute. Then what we're going to do is change one of the dictionary values in Array 1 and see how that affects Array 1 and Array 2. So let's run that and see what it looks like. So let's jump through to number 8. Okay, so Array 1 has been reset, Array 2 is a copy of Array 1. So let's change the value in Array 1. Here we have ID changed to 555 again here, but notice this time it does not affect Array 2. And the reason for that is when we use duplicate true, it does what is called a deep copy. And what deep copy does is it recursively duplicates everything in the source array or dictionary. This is equally applicable to, for example, a dictionary that contains arrays, an array of arrays, an array that contains arrays of dictionaries, and so on. As you might imagine, this operation can be computationally expensive. In other words, it uses a lot of CPU cycles because what it's having to do is allocate a new chunk of memory for all of the data from Array 1 to give Array 2 its own copy. And then it has to go through and actually copy all of the values from one location to another. However, this does mean that you now have a unique copy of the data that you can work on. And this is useful in a very large array of situations. Main thing to watch out for is avoiding copying very, very large arrays or dictionaries that may contain large arrays. In those situations, it's better to find some way of filtering down the source array so that you don't have to copy all of the data that's in that array. One situation where you might have a very complex data structure is where you're doing a game save file where you're manually assembling all the game save data into, for example, JSON format, and you have arrays and dictionaries that contain details of all the elements in the game that you need to keep track of, and then saving that. And then of course when you load up the game you have to unpick it in reverse, as it were. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that. If you did, please like and subscribe. Please check out the other videos on my channel, and I'll see you next time.